All right, let's get started. We're going to spend an hour or so, maybe a little less, talking about kind of common challenges that we have in technology as business folks, as developers, and some solutions, some innovative solutions for those challenges. Some solutions that may not be kind of commonplace today, but we're going to show you some new ideas and new ways to think about some of these challenges. Today we have myself, Eric Boyd, from responsiveX, and Jason Rook. Jason is from Microsoft. Jason is the business development manager for Windows Azure partners in the Midwest and Heartland, right? Okay. And so let me just introduce who we are as responsiveX, and then I'll introduce Jason a little more here in a little bit and turn it over to him. So responsiveX, we are a consulting company. We help customers do a few things, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is, what that looks like. We are a Microsoft partner. We are also a part of a kind of an elite group of partners that are focused on Windows Azure. So that's the Azure Circle partner. And then also, I am personally a Windows Azure MVP. There's about 14 of us in the US, and what that means is basically we are kind of deep and heavily focused in Windows Azure. We help customers develop applications around Windows Azure. So let me show you what that looks like. I mentioned that we do a few things, and what we do is pretty simple. We help customers build web, mobile, and then traditional client apps. So we're really a consultancy focused on application and software development, and oftentimes these applications, at least today, end up making use of the cloud in one way or another. And so this is really what we do all day, every day, and usually that cloud is Windows Azure, Microsoft's cloud platform, and so that's what we're going to dive into today. We are based out of the Chicago area, so we have a location in downtown Chicago, out in the Chicago burbs of Oak Brook, and then in downtown Milwaukee as well. So those are our primary locations, our primary focus today in the Midwest. However, we do work with customers all over the country. And I mentioned earlier I was in Orlando last week and met a number of folks, and we work with customers kind of all over, coast to coast. Our common challenges today that we face, and we're going to talk about in more detail, really look like this. Most of us can relate to these problems. For example, storage. How often does it occur that we have shortages of storage in our data center? And we often think of storage as being storage is cheap. Hard drives are cheap. And while that's generally true when we're talking about a hard drive, even an SSD, you can buy a 1/2 terabyte SSD for a few $100s today. So hard drives individually are cheap, but when we're buying disk for our data centers and we're buying large storage area networks and SANs, we're spending tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars for that storage. So to get the redundancy and the high availability that we need for storage, it's very expensive. And so it's not generally a quick decision to add storage to our data center. It's generally a long, drawn-out decision with approval processes and what have you. Beyond that, the time to market is generally slow. And so because of those long, drawn-out processes and decision-making processes, it slows us down to deliver value back to our business. It slows us down in building apps and deploying apps to our users that really drive the business. During our development cycles, we also have some challenges with the infrastructure. I know I used to be a tech exec before responsiveX, and so I used to lead a group of developers and an infrastructure team for a large global transport company. In doing that, it became real obvious real quickly that we devote a ton of attention and resources to our production environments, to our data center and our servers and our disk and that production capacity. But we don't devote a ton of resources to our development and test teams. You may be able to relate to this, but we, as developers and as QA groups, we get kind of whatever is left over and we make do with that. And oftentimes that's problematic, trying to build an environment that looks and feels like our production environment, or even just provides us enough resources to do adequate development and testing. And then moving on, once we get beyond that, we may have challenges with scalability. So we build our app and we get through all of those challenges of dev test and time to market, and we get to production, and then something occurs. Maybe that's just growth in our business. Maybe it's linear growth that occurs. We're a company that's growing year over year, and we have to deal with scale. Or maybe it's something like TechCrunch or Oprah talked about our business. And so we have to deal with that and scale our websites and our app servers and our data. And so those are challenges that we have. And then we're kind of back in this catch-22. We're back to this slow time to market and the shortage of resources. And how do we respond quickly to those events? Next, we have another scenario of challenges that really hinges and centers around mobile apps. And when I say mobile apps, I don't necessarily mean apps that run on a phone and a tablet. Now, that's one big scenario, but we're really talking about a broader scenario, which is I want to open that data center, my data center with all of my servers and all of my databases, all of that real mission critical stuff that usually is internal, but now I want to open that to the outside world. So maybe that's a trading partner, or maybe that's a website, maybe that is a mobile device. And so there are just challenges associated with doing that from a security perspective. It's just a comfort level that most people don't have. And so that's a common challenge that we deal with. And then once all of this is going well, if we solve all of these problems and we get past the infrastructure shortage and the time to markets and the scalability and that security issue, then we just have the cost and the burden of the day-to-day management of all of that stuff, all of those servers and disks and what have you. And so those are just common challenges we deal with. I've experienced these kind of being in the hot seat, being a tech exec for a number of years, and know that this is problematic. I now run a business and have these same sorts of issues to deal with. So these are the common challenges we all face. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Jason Rook from Microsoft. We have a special guest today, and so Jason is going to talk about how we can solve these problems and what Microsoft is doing to make this easier. So without any more, Jason.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. I'm going to go ahead and take over as presenter here and move some slides forward. And this is really a conversation I like to have. It's more of a brainstorming conversation. And what I'll do is I'll run through some common scenarios that we are delivering with our Windows Azure platform. And just really kind of go through some things, and we'll talk about some challenges and some ways that other customers have solved those challenges. And I'll give you a little high-level overview on what Windows Azure is itself. I think that'll be helpful. So, and the first slide I have up here is a little bit about today's cloud transformation. I don't think anyone on this call is surprised by anything here. This is really just, some common themes that customers want to have these massive amounts of resources. They want them pooled. They want to be able to access these resources in a self-service manner, right? So I've got access to one server or thousands of servers, and when I want to touch it, I can touch it and get to it without a whole lot of extra layers in between myself and those back-end services. I want them to be elastic. So when I engage with that one server on one day, and then 3 days later I want it to be 1,000 servers, and I want it to all be automatic and elastic and easily expandable. And then I want to just pay based on what I use, so usage-based costing. And so this is some common themes. I don't think those are unique to anyone, and they're definitely not unique to Microsoft. And it's really all about economics and agility and focus.
Jason, can I stop you? Can I stop you right there?
Sure.
Can everybody see the presentation okay? Just wanted to make sure. It sounded like we had a technical problem. Maybe somebody not seeing it, but.
Oh, good catch. Yeah, there will be a little bit of slide build out. So.
All right.
If you can't, go ahead and throw something in the IM window as well and let me know. And
Yep.
if there's something you miss, I'll definitely try to speak to it as well. Cool.
All right. Sounds good.
Sounds good. Yeah, so one of the things that is maybe a little bit unique to Microsoft is that we do have this philosophy on basically leveraging the investments that customers have already made. So almost all of our customers have made some on-premise investment over the year, right? So you're running something, a SQL server on-prem or a SharePoint server on-premise or some Windows server for file and print. But we also want to provide the ability to move those workloads around in different fashions. So our cloud strategy is to really provide all four of these paradigms. So on-premise, infrastructure as a service, so folks that want to take the components that lie under their operating system. So think about your hypervisor and your processing power, networking gear, those types of things, and leverage that pooled resource model that I mentioned earlier. Then there are customers that want to just basically manage their own platform. So they manage their apps and their data, and the rest of the entire stack is managed by Microsoft. So everything from the runtime layer down to the networking stack. And then there are customers that don't want to manage any of these components. They just want to access some application via cloud mechanism. Office 365 is a fantastic example of that, where we provide all of the email and SharePoint and link services, and we take care of all those components you see on the screen, and you just access and get your mail and go forward as needed. And so this is a little bit of a different strategy than some of our competitors have, because a lot of our competitors land in one or two of these silos, where we want to stay focused on all four of these, because we know that customers want to have a highly flexible environment. We know that it's a long way from an on-premise migration to a SaaS offering. So we think that's a little bit of a competitive advantage, and also something that our customers have really asked for. We also have invested significantly in these major data centers. So today across the globe, we have between 10 and 100 major data centers. Most of the folks on the call here from the Midwest, so you're probably familiar with the Chicago data center that Microsoft has, but these are world-class data centers that are significant in investment and cost, and also their ability to provide production to you. These are also scattered across the globe, so we can do really cool things like move data across geographies, rich disaster recovery, those types of things. So it's a pretty unique offering as well, and it's somewhat massive. Then, as I scroll forward here, I don't want to overbuild out. So if you think about what we're delivering, we have this infrastructure layer that's automated, it's elastic, it can be self-managed, you pay for it as you use it. And then we deliver these additional things on top of that infrastructure. And I'm going to dive in. The best way to go through this is I'm going to dive into each one of these blocks today just for a second to give you an idea about what these are and how people are using them. And then we build on top of those rich building blocks, and we provide more end applications, so things like content delivery and identity and those types of things. And these are all accessible by a pretty open and standard framework. So we have folks that access the Azure world through Java and Node.js. We have developers that are writing rich mobile applications using PHP, and we also have a great environment for traditional .NET developers as well. So this is a really rich way to access all this underlying infrastructure that we're providing. So let's dive into a couple of these and go a little deeper. So cloud services. So the one thing that we provide is these stateless virtual machines. If you think about these are really virtualized IIS boxes that allow you to write rich back-end code in a highly scalable and manageable fashion. So, and these are all services that you pay for as you use them. They're very elastic, and they're very cost-effective. If you think about the last time you had to purchase, procure, deploy, and manage an IIS server, it was quite a bit of work. This is as simple as going to a portal and click, 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 and you've got a web server up and running. Then we also provide virtual machines, and these are traditionally more of what you would think of as a virtualized instance in your own data center, just running in the Microsoft data center. They're pretty easy to access. We've got a rich management portal that we provide to give you access to your virtual machines, rich scripting environment, open standards to get at them. We also provide quite a few different types of virtual machines, everything from Windows Server to Ubuntu. And you can see this if you've had a chance to log into Azure.com and maybe use your MSPN subscription to play around with the technology. You'll notice this portion of the portal called the gallery, where you can actually go in and select and say you want to build a SUSE VM. You can actually within a few clicks have a SUSE VM up and running within Windows Azure. And then they all access this very rich and highly cost-effective storage platform that I'll dive into as we go forward today. If you think about what some of the key scenarios are, and this is kind of where we talk about those challenges that people are facing today. So with these, the Azure virtual machines, there are a couple of really hot spots that we're seeing in the market. So one is people that are migrating existing applications. So the way I always like to put it is that I've got an application that never seems to die, but the hardware always does. right? And I'm tired of fighting the hardware battle with this app. I just want to get it the heck out of my data center, get it to some place that's more cost effective, and I don't need to worry about all the underlying hardware. And we see this as a very common scenario where people are taking that application, they get it virtualized, and they pop it into the Azure cloud. We also see an opportunity where folks are doing a lot, or I should say immense amounts of development and tests. So if you're in an organization that has a lot of developers, or if you're in an organization that relies on an application that you develop and take to market, you've definitely got a need for develop and test. And think about traditionally the amount of infrastructure that we've all bought to support development and test environments on-prem. It's very, very cost effective to take that development and test environment and pop it into the Azure cloud, where you pay for what you need. It's very elastic and it's very cheap, so to speak. We also see a lot of customers using Azure for their backup, their VM backup, or disaster recovery. So think about, I've got things that run on-prem, but if my on-premise site goes down, I want to be able to fire them up very quickly. Maybe I've looked at colo facilities and those types of things, but great opportunity to leverage a highly scalable and kind of more cost-effective platform. And then the last one is hybrid cloud. So, an example that I use on this one often with customers is that we have a lot of people that have deployed SharePoint, and they've highly customized that SharePoint environment, but they would like to bring up maybe another SharePoint server, maybe an index server, that type of thing, and they don't want to pay for the underlying hardware to do that. So this is an example where somebody might actually have a SharePoint environment that runs on-prem, but they bring up that next SharePoint server in an Azure cloud, so they're not paying for that hardware. And we see that with all kinds of applications where folks who say, no, I'm not going to get rid of my on-premise environment, but I do need to expand, and expanding into Azure makes a lot of sense. From a cloud services perspective, kind of a similar story that we see a lot of folks that are leveraging the hybrid model. So maybe they had some websites or some web apps that were running on-prem. They want to extend those. They use the hybrid model in cloud services. But we also see a lot of customers that are developing net new apps purely in a cloud model. And this is what we call platform as a service. They're actually just, if you think about those four silos that I showed earlier, these are folks that don't want to deal with any of the underlying environment. They just want to get to the runtime and develop a rich application. So it's a great way to, if you're thinking about, I need to build an application, you should almost default to, I want to build an application in a PaaS mode and leverage a service like Windows Azure. So let's take a look at, the last thing I'll mention here is the website. So I mentioned earlier, if you go out to the Azure.com portal and you log into the management portal, you'll see this gallery where you can pick different types of virtual machines. You'll also see a gallery where you can pick different types of websites. So there's a number of websites out there, .NET Nuke and some other CMS websites, WordPress, you name it. And really, it's just a very rich environment to quickly create highly scalable websites that are incredibly cost-effective, some of which are even for free. So if you have a chance, you should take a look at that. You'll also notice that this is a highly open environment, right? So we support SQL and MySQL and Windows and Mac and Linux and Git and FTP and Web Matrix. So it's not just a Visual Studio or a Microsoft-only story. It's a very rich story for all the developers in your organization and folks that are writing different types of applications. So let's move into data real quick. You'll notice something from a data standpoint around SQL Server. And this is one of those common challenges that customers have told us about, that they have SQL servers on-prem. They want to expand what those SQL servers do, but they don't want to pay for hardware to expand those. So SQL in Azure makes a lot of sense for those customers. The other thing that customers want to do is they want to take that data that they've got in those SQL servers that are running on-prem, and they want to expand it out so that people can get to it from different places. Maybe they have branch offices or business partners or suppliers. Maybe they have folks that are wanting to access that data through mobile apps or through mobile devices like pads and phones and that type of thing. And they want to get it into a place that's easily accessible, right? So, and highly scalable. If you think about doing that on-prem, that's going to require hardware and networking gear and a whole lot of expertise and know-how to do that. But when you move to SQL or replicate SQL into the Azure cloud, it gives you this whole other paradigm on how to access and leverage that data. So this is a place where customers are seeming to really dive in with Azure and attack a challenge that they have around cost and around data access. Another place where we see customers leveraging Azure is just to provide simple database simple database functionality in the cloud or in the sky, so to speak. So Azure has this NoSQL database technology where we give people rich table and relational tables within Azure for an incredibly cost-effective price. And we see customers doing that, especially customers that are doing things like writing mobile applications and they just need some data in the cloud to access, or some data storage in the cloud to access some key things that they might need within that mobile app, customer names and account information and that type of stuff. So very cost-effective way to get relational storage within the cloud. And the last thing from a storage perspective is Blob Storage. And if you think about this, this is just an incredibly simple way to store a boatload of unstructured data on very cheap storage. So, the Microsoft data centers have just terabytes, or I should say petabytes and petabytes of storage that we provide at an incredibly cost-effective price point. And so we see people that are using Azure for storage. In fact, we see people that are doing really cool things from a storage perspective, like providing rich DR. Let me go back to that slide and give you an example of folks that might have data that sits on-prem, and they want to have a disaster recovery model that supports, maybe if their on-premise site fails, that they've got other places to access that data. We also see customers that are doing DR just across our data centers. So maybe the primary copy of their data is in the Chicago data center, but they have an async copy that sits at our San Antonio data center. So this is an incredibly hot topic right now, because if you want to do this with your own storage and do it on-prem, it's a very expensive proposition. You think about, if anybody's quoted out the price of a SAN lately, it's not exactly cheap. So we see customers that are rapidly adopting Azure Storage for their high availability solution. We also see third parties that are building very rich storage solutions on top of Azure. So here's an example of a company called StoreSimple that actually has a device that they'll put on-prem, and that device is more of a caching device. It actually has a combination of SATA storage and SD storage. It fits in a standard rack, and you can actually use that device to store things that you need access to frequently. So maybe I need transactional data I need to hit all the time, but maybe some of the data that I use at quarterly close I only need to hit at the end of the quarter. That StoreSimple device is smart enough, and it will learn over the course of time where to put that data in the most cost-effective manner. And some of that data that you access from time to time, it'll put in the Azure Blob Storage. Data that you need repeatedly, it will hold local in SD storage. This solution is actually so compelling to customers that Microsoft actually acquired StoreSimple. We actually closed that deal back on November 15th of 2012. So this is relatively new stuff. We'll continue to roll this product out and apply R&D to it and deliver it to customers in different ways. But it's a great example of how people are using Azure Blob Storage to deliver up some pretty unique hybrid storage solutions. Another one that I like to talk about, because this is a very hot topic with storage, is an offering from a partner of Microsoft called Commvault. What Commvault does really well is that they apply a number of intelligence factors on top of storage. So things like archiving, dedupe, encryption, the ability to have an e-discovery interface into the data. Commvault also runs very well with other storage providers. So they work well with NetApps and Dell, Equilogic Storage, and they provide this great middle layer. And what they've noticed is that customers want cheaper spindles, so to speak. So they actually have taken their product set, upgraded it, and pointed to Azure Storage as a set of cheaper spindles for customers that may say, hey, I'm running out of room on this NetApp SAN that I purchased. I want to move some data somewhere, and I want to do it on the cheap. And Commvault actually takes that and manages it for them and pushes that data into the Azure Blob Storage cloud. So I'm going to jump in. I'll clear out these next handful of topics, and then I'll jump over to the questions window. The other thing that we deliver up through Azure is this very unique networking environment. So if you think about developers that need an easy way to access their cloud network, we've done a lot of stuff with Visual Studio and Azure to make it incredibly simple for developers to have a rich on-prem to cloud networking world. We've also taken that one step further for infrastructure folks and administrators that want to have a rich virtual network environment. So maybe they've got servers that run on-prem, probably have printers that run on-premise, but they have other applications that run in this Azure environment, and they want to have them all appear that they sit on the same network. So maybe I can print directly out of an application to an on-premise printer, but it's actually sitting in the Azure cloud. So we've got this rich virtual networking environment that we provide to customers to allow them to have that kind of seamless and similar interface across their different platforms. And then finally, any place where you've got a rich networking environment, you probably need a traffic manager, right? So we've got this rich load balancer that allows people to balance this traffic as it comes in and out across these different hosted services and even across our different data centers. It helps them to build these apps that are incredibly global and scalable and also perform quite well. So we see this as another service that we kind of deliver in that particular layer. So let me, I'll take a look at the question window. Great question about SQL storage. It looks like you got that one, Eric. Great.
Yeah, and if you want to continue, I'll monitor the question window for you while you continue going, if that's fine.
Oh yeah. If you want to, that's a good question about the websites as well, which has changed a little bit in the last year. With now we have the rich IaaS environment and then also the web worker roles. So go ahead and take that one, and I'll keep moving. Good. So let's dive a little bit into that next layer around content and caching, etc. And I hope some of these are kind of sparking some light bulbs for you. The idea is not to go incredibly deep, just to provide some ideas. So with content delivery, this is interesting. So I showed earlier the slide of all kind of a handful of different data centers we have scattered across the globe. We also have what we call edge data centers, and these are places that are scattered to help us provide content delivery on the edge. So think about outside of our core data center network, we have the ability to take data and kind of scatter it across the globe so that people can get it kind of closest point, right? So if I'm sitting in Western Europe and I need to get some data that was created originally in Chicago, this content delivery network gives us the ability to scoot that data across the globe and get it closest to those end users that need it. It's a pretty rich offering that customers are taking advantage of, especially global organizations. And I'll come back to this when I talk about media as well, because they have a play together. From a caching perspective, we've got this interesting caching scenario where we cache data in different places. Between the data tier and the business logic tier, between the business logic tier and the web tier, and then also in front of the web tier for people that behind the load balancer, for people that need quick access to this data. So if you think about, sometimes people get caught up in the idea that the cloud's a slower mechanism for me to write an application. That's not necessarily true at all. In many cases, the cloud can be much faster because you have the ability to do things like access data at the closest point, leverage some of these services like caching, and also leverage just the performance ability and the elasticity that's provided in the cloud. From an integration perspective, we provide this rich service bus, for lack of a better term, where we can actually move data in multiple ways. And you'll see as the product evolves, you'll see more of what goes on in our BizTalk product lineup end up here as well. In fact, we recently made some pretty unique announcements around BizTalk and Azure integration. So if you think about people that are doing things like gathering supply chain information and wanting to get that out to their partners and suppliers and vendors, Azure provides this very rich mechanism to move that data and present that data to different folks in different formats and even to different devices. So the message in place is a place where we see customers really latching on to, before you go out and buy a huge EAI tool with all the hardware baggage and storage baggage that comes with it, Azure provides you a very simple and quick way to provide that rich EI layer in the cloud. And then from a BI perspective, I mentioned earlier about SQL reporting and NoSQL tables, but we see customers that want to deliver up rich BI. And Azure is a great way to do that. I mentioned this SQL Azure earlier. We also have reporting services within that service as well. So maybe you have business intelligence on-prem that you want to deliver up to folks, regardless of where they're at or what device they're on. But Azure is a great way to do that as well, without some of the cost that's usually associated with delivering up that business intelligence, and from a hardware perspective and networking gear, etc. Then Hadoop. So you've probably read a little bit in the press lately about Hadoop and some of the things that we're doing with Hadoop. The Azure solution is fantastic for Hadoop scenarios because of that scale out, scale up scenario that we have. So if you've got immense amounts of unstructured and structured data coming in, even in different time waves, right? So a lot of this unstructured data comes in maybe around a web campaign or around an event that might take place, and then you quickly need to aggregate it and sort it and manipulate it and then build some solutions and analytics on top of it. Azure gives you the ability to scale very rapidly and do just that. So we've got this Hadoop framework that sits on top of Azure to deliver up some of these unique Hadoop solutions. So great scenario. We see a lot of customers that are moving this way quickly as this desire to get our arms around unstructured data becomes more relevant, and people are developing more kind of end-user functionality around this unstructured data. Another service that we see customers really gravitating towards is Active Directory services within Azure. So think of this as like Active Directory in the sky, more or less. And there are a couple different scenarios that make a lot of sense here. So folks that are doing rich things with Office 365 want to extend Active Directory for that. That makes a lot of sense. But there's also customers that are writing applications that need to leverage other directory services, from Google to Yahoo to Facebook, etc. With Windows Azure Active Directory, we've got the ability to integrate with those other directories that are out there and provide one unique interface. So if you're writing a Facebook app and you need to be able to authenticate people against both Facebook and maybe Active Directory, it's a very interesting solution. We actually see a lot of mobile app developers that are using this solution to do authentication. So not just Windows Mobile, but iOS and Android as well. This is a great solution for folks that need to do access and authorization via a cloud mechanism. And I mentioned earlier around how content delivery and media kind of go together. Media services is this very unique component that we offer up within Azure, and it does a solution that you may or may not be familiar with. If anybody's ever run media service on IIS, you know it's a little bit of it's a resource hog, and it's a little difficult to get set up and get working. What we've done is we've taken all that Windows Media Services work that we did in IIS, and we moved it into the Azure Cloud. And so this actually gives you the ability to take video content, media content, but video is the one that people seem to gravitate towards. Let's say I have a situation where I shoot some video in HD format. And maybe I want that converted into other formats for different devices, maybe a pad or a phone, maybe different types of PCs, maybe even television, right? I can take that video that I've shot, I can upload it into the Azure Cloud, to media services. Media services will encode it, they'll do the format conversion, they'll even lock it down and protect my content, and then they'll do all the streaming work as well, which is all highly processor-intensive work. Very storage-intensive work. It's stuff that people spend a lot of money in infrastructure to deliver today, and we can do this on an as-needed, pay-as-you-go basis with media services. We also leverage that content delivery network that I talked about earlier to deliver this up. So maybe that content that you just shot in the Chicago area, maybe you need to get that to people in Brazil or in Asia. And by using content delivery, we've got a very effective mechanism to get that content out to closest point for those customers or end users that need to access that content. So media service is very unique. We see this taken off in places all across the board, from folks that are doing this with rich media and television and broadcasting, that type of thing, down to folks that are writing or doing just rich employee training videos and those types of things that need to get employee training content out to folks that may be scattered across their global organization. And the last thing I'll touch on here is high-performance computing. So a few years ago, we delivered what we called Microsoft Windows high-performance computing. And what we realized is that the challenge with high-performance computing is that high-performance computing requires a boatload of infrastructure investment. And so we've realized that customers would prefer to have all of this functionality, the ability to take a lot of process and jam it into thousands of processors and run that processing and then go on to the next job. They would rather do that without the upfront infrastructure cost to do that. And so we've moved all the Windows high-performance computing solutions into the Azure Cloud, and we deliver those up. So think about things that maybe, think about a financial services company that at the quarter end, they just have boatloads and boatloads of processing that needs to take place. Maybe sometimes this processing goes for days or even a week. we can actually take those processing apps and move them into Azure HPC and scale up to meet the needs and drive down that time frame and also drive up the cost efficiency of those processes. So just another great example of how people are using Azure today. So with that, I hope that helped to kind of spark some ideas and let you know a little bit more about the Windows Azure platform and how it's actually being used in the market today. And I'll turn it back over to Eric now to wrap us up and run through a couple of opportunities for everyone on the phone.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jason. That was really good. I want to kind of give you some guidance, some pointers on how you can jumpstart this journey. First off, if you are not using Windows Azure today, if you're not familiar with Windows Azure, but you'd like to get your hands on Windows Azure and kick the tires, there are a couple of options for you. There's a 90-day free trial of Windows Azure that you can just go sign up for. If you go to windowsazure.com, you won't be able to miss it. There are actually two links on windowsazure.com, one in the upper right-hand corner and one right in the middle of the page that says free trial. So you shouldn't be able to miss that. When you do that, it'll walk you through a wizard. That wizard will ask you a few things. One of the things will be contact information. The other thing that it'll ask for is your credit card information. Don't be alarmed by this. There is some validation that occurs basically to ensure you are kind of who you say you are, but you're only one person basically. So, for example, Microsoft does not want to allow all of us to go spin up new live IDs and get free trials all day long. So they ensure that by asking for your credit card. Now, you have the option of saying, I want to use the allowed resources, and I'll show you the resources here in a second, or and only the allowed resources. So when I exceed that, when I hit that limit, go ahead and shut my services off. Or I want to be able to go over. So that credit card will also be used in that case if you opt in to say, if I pass my resources that you've provided me in my free trial, go ahead and go over and just bill my credit card. And so there's an option in your account to turn off a feature called spending limit. One of the things that I will caution you, if you create a new free trial, you have the spending limit enabled by default. If you turn that spending limit off, you can't get it back on. So I'm just cautioning you right now, be careful about how you use that. If you truly want to just bill me if I go over, that's great. But if you're just kicking the tires and you want to have that spending limit on, don't turn it off because you can't turn it back on. So the resources that you get are pretty nice. You get 3 months free, 90 days. This includes kind of all of these services that are listed here. So I get compute time, I get storage. You basically get an instance of compute that you can run all month long. You get 750 hours of compute, and so what that equates to is basically a month's worth of a server. You get that for free in this free trial, and you get storage as well, like Jason talked about, that Blob Storage. You get databases, that SQL database offering as well. Now, there's also benefits for MSDN subscribers. If you have an MSDN subscription today, depending on your level of subscription, so if you have an Ultimate, you get up to $3,700 a year worth of Azure time. So you get 1,500 hours of a small instance, and so basically that equates to two instances, two servers running all month long for you. So you get all sorts of resources here. And this slide has actually been updated, so you get additional storage resources now with the introduction of virtual machines. So you get all this for free, just including your MSDN subscription. So activate that. So if you go through that same free trial option, one of the things that you'll be presented with, if you log in with your live ID that your MSDN is attached to, it will ask you if you want to activate your MSDN subscription or your free trial. So you get there in the same way. And then lastly, I want to talk about free consulting time. Everybody likes to get stuff for free. One of the things that you can get is free consulting time, 3, 5, and 10-day engagements from Microsoft. So basically the way this works, if you have an enterprise agreement that has software assurance, more than likely you have deployment planning services days on your enterprise agreement. And you can use those days for Windows Azure consulting. And so what we do, Microsoft partners with consulting companies like ours, like responsiveX, and make sure that we are qualified to deliver these sorts of engagements. So there's certification that has to occur and all sorts of stuff. But once we are qualified, which we are, then we can provide you 3, 5, and 10-day consulting engagements using those DPS vouchers. So it doesn't cost you a thing. You just assign those DPS vouchers to responsiveX, and then we can come in and help you architect your application, do an assessment of existing applications that you have on the feasibility or what it would take to move those to the cloud, do some design sessions around some new apps, stuff like that, cost modeling, some training, maybe even build out a proof of concept of your application. So we can use those days in a structured engagement to help you kind of get started and jumpstart your journey to the cloud. So that's a little bit about what we can provide in terms of free consulting. So with that, I want to open it up. We've had some questions in the comments, the IM window. I want to open it up to any other questions that we may have. And then